In today's show, we're going to get you to switch that camera from photography mode to video mode, and I don't care how much you fear it. Hey everyone, welcome into Magnolia Photography SC. I'm Jeff House. I'm a wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. So today we are going to talk about getting those cameras of ours out of photo mode and into video mode, because we're going to talk about stepping away from wildlife photography and stepping into the wonderful world of wildlife videography. Now, how many of you, and don't lie to me because I will get to the bottom of it if you are. I will find out. I have my ways. How many of you out there are thinking to yourself, have thought to yourself, have said to yourself, and said to someone else, you know what? One of these days, just one of these days, I'm going to flip that little switch on this camera and I'm going to go into video mode. And I'm going to start doing a little videography of wildlife because I love wildlife and video's cool. I don't care what you say. Video is cool. How many of you have had it in video mode, your subject came into view, and you're like, oh shit. And you go back to camera mode because you're like, I really don't know a lot about video and I don't want to mess this moment up. So I'm going to go to camera mode where I can take some photos and capture this subject. If you're thinking or saying, or you have anything like this, today is the day. I hope we bring these feelings, these thoughts, these fears, these concerns, whatever it is, I hope we bring them to an end. What I want to do here, guys, is a two-part video. And today, what we're going to be talking about are the camera settings that are essential for doing videography, right? You need to know some camera settings, just the way it goes. And you know, I'm not a huge settings person because at the end of the day, settings don't really matter. We need to understand settings so that we can create images. We can create images very well, but I don't want us to all just be this technical robot, right? We need to have some creativity in there too. But settings are important so that we know how to freeze action or take video or do different things in our wildlife photography and videography without screwing up the shot because we got the technical aspects wrong. So it is important for that reason. So that's what today's video is going to be focused on, is helping to understand and kind of demystify the camera settings we need when taking video. And then what I want to do, and this should be a week later after this video, but I want to jump into a video editing software. My choice is CapCut. It's not as complex as programs like Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro by Apple. But it's a very powerful video editor, but I want to really go over the basics of video editing, and it's going to give you enough tools and enough resources to be dangerous with your video editing, and you can really do some great stuff, and it will allow you to capture video and post it wherever you want to post it, and it will look professional. So you will have everything you pretty much need to know after these two shows. Now, I've got some handy dandy notes here today because we have a lot of information to cover and I really don't want to miss anything. This is actually the third time I'm recording this show because a couple things came to mind as I was going through it that are important. And I'm like, you idiot, how did you forget to include that? So nonetheless, I've stopped recording and now I'm back and whatever. So let's jump in and get right to today's show. First thing that we need to address is there's a setting in your camera that applies to video. Now, typically this will come already set up for you by default based on where, you know, your camera is being sold. So if you are buying a camera in North America, you're operating your camera in North America, then you're going to want to find this setting, but you can either set your camera to NTSC or PAL. So for those of you in North America, set it to NTSC because that is going to basically be in accordance with 24 frames per second. And those of you who are in Europe and some other parts of the world, you are going to want to put your camera into the PAL mode, where that recognizes 25 frames per second. Now, without getting super technical and super geeky, what you need to know is that if this setting is incorrect in your camera, when you take a video, you're going to get a lot of flickering when you play it back. So if you're getting a lot of flickering, first thing I would do is dive into your camera and take a look at the setting. And of course, I would dive into my camera to take a look at the setting before I even start taking video, just to be certain that it is correct and you don't waste any time or lose any good footage that you might have captured. The great thing about this setting is that once you get this right in your camera, you just have to set it and forget it. Okay, you will not have to revisit this or come back to it at a later date and time. It's one and done. So that's the good news. So do that. Again, North Americans, set it to the NTSC, and those of you in Europe, set it to the PAL. Let's talk about video format. This is extremely important, and this is really the crux of everything that we need to know when it comes to capturing video. Now, the first thing that we're going to worry about when it comes to the format is what resolution do we want to record our video in? We're going to have a few different options. And I do want to stress, before we dive too deep into these different features of video format, I want to stress that depending on your camera's make and model, you may have some of these options, you may not. These are going to be very specific to your camera and the video functions that your particular model offers. So I will try to remind you of this as we go through different parts of this video to show you that, hey, this could be different here or this could be different there. So again, just keep that on the back burner for now as we proceed, but let's look at the resolution. So most cameras today, most modern day cameras will offer you a video format of 1080p, right? That is a standard high definition format. I know a lot of people will steer away from this because they want to go with a higher resolution like 4K. But the truth of the matter is this: most of the viewing of video today is performed on a cell phone, right? That's how everyone is really living their life and consuming stuff online. It's through the cell phone. So quite honestly, if you have a 1080p high def video on and someone's watching it on their cell phone, they're not going to be able to tell whether it's 1080p or 4K. You're probably going to have to put that on a much larger display to where you would maybe start to see some of the differences. And even then, it can be a little bit difficult to the untrained eye for sure. So don't be afraid of using 1080p. It's definitely a beautiful file format and will work really well for you. The next one, of course, as I just kind of mentioned and touched upon, is 4K. That is what most of the videos you see being put out by photographers and YouTubers is going to be. In fact, if you look at my videos on YouTube, you will see an icon that has the 4K, right? So you're going to see that right away. And 4K is a great format, provides a ton of resolution and detail, and it's really just a beautiful format to create video in. And it's not too bad or too cumbersome when working in editing programs and things like that. But there are a few other settings that go with it that maybe will impact just how easy it is to work with. We'll touch on those in a second. Now, depending on how new your camera is, you may even have the option to do 8K. I'm going to keep this simple, right? Based on where we are in the world right now with 8K technology, just stay away from it. It's overkill at this point, and I really wouldn't even entertain the thought of videoing in 8K format. So that'll make your life easier. Just keep it to 1080 or 4K. All right, next thing we're going to talk about is color preference. What you're going to see when you're into your video formats is you typically have a choice. And I want to stress, this is based on your camera make and model and how new your camera is. It wasn't that long ago, what I'm going to talk about, some of them weren't even an option. But with the modern technology, these, a lot of cameras will allow you to choose here. But you can essentially choose your color preferences. You're going to see this listed as 420 or 422. Now, like I said, years ago, 422 wasn't even an option to select internally on a camera. Cameras couldn't handle recording in the 422 format. You actually had to have an external recording device attached to your camera so that you could capture that. But now modern technology is so wonderful, and it's allowing us a lot of creative freedoms, and one of those is the inclusion of 422. All this really means, and all you need to take away from this, is that you have 420. That's going to provide you with a certain number of colors in your video. But if you go 422, you're going to get a lot more color from your video footage. So definitely worth doing it if your camera can handle it and your computer can handle it and all of those things. Because what I want you to remember with video is anytime we start talking about using the better settings so that we get better quality videos, it means a lot more taxing labor on your computers, on your memory cards, on your cameras, and so on down the line. So you got to keep that in mind, because it's not like photography. When we increase file size and file quality with videos, it becomes much more difficult to process this. So you kind of have to make sure that all of your equipment can handle the increase in file quality. Now, what I recommend you do with any of these settings, of course, is do some video in the 420 mode and do some video in the 422 mode. See if you notice any difference in working with the file. See if you notice any difference with how the file looks. If you're happy with the 420 and it's easier for you to process and all of those great things, then stick with that, right? No big deal. But I want you guys to understand what's available to you and what it means. So 420, 422, how much color is in your video. Next thing that we're going to talk about is the bit rate. Now you're probably going to see, okay, well, you can do 422 in 10-bit, or you can do 420 in 8-bit, or 420 in 10-bit, whatever, right? Bit rate is simply, it accounts for 1 second of your video, and the bit rate is really just it's just a way to measure the quality of our video. So the higher the number, the better quality our video is. So 10 is better than 8. But once again, sometimes it's really difficult to tell the difference between 8-bit and 10-bit. And you got to figure out the trade-off for you, right? And you got to do some testing. So do some video with your camera in 8-bit. Do some video with your camera in 10-bit. Do you notice a difference in quality? If you don't, then just stick with the 8-bit, right? If it's easier to work with and you can fit more video on your memory cards and all of those good things. But just understand what bit rate is. Just a measurement of the quality of our video, and the higher the number, the better the quality. The next thing that we need to talk about, this is important, is we're going to talk about frame rates. Frame rates and shutter speed are really something that need to be discussed together. And there's a reason for this, which we are going to get to in 1 second. Now, for those of you who know photography and you understand how to use shutter speed in your photography, we can use shutter speed to do a lot of things in our photography, right? We can use it to help control our exposure by either letting less light into the camera or letting more light into the camera. We can also use it for creative effects, right? We can use a slower shutter speed to give our photos a sense of motion, or we can use a really fast shutter speed where we freeze the action and and everything is just really, really sharp and frozen in time, right? And it looks beautiful. So that's how shutter speed works in photography, but in video, it's very different. And the reason being is that in video, we want to have a certain shutter speed coupled with our frame rate to give us the most natural looking footage. So shutter speed in video is essentially twice whatever frame rate you set. Now, frame rates, here's the typical frame rates that you're going to find in your cameras that we purchase, right? You're going to find either 24, 30, 60, 120, or 240. And again, I want to stress, this really all depends on your camera's make and model, right? Did you go with a less expensive model? Did you go with the more expensive model? Is your camera from 2024 or is it from 2016? These are all going to matter significantly as to the video features that your camera offers. So you're also going to find that when you go in to choose a video format and you choose a resolution, let's say 1080p, you will probably find that you have more frames per second options. You probably will have 24, 30, 60, most likely even 120. But as you go to 4K, you may find that you have 24, 30, and 60. Some cameras like my Sony A1 do offer me the 120 and 4K, which is nice, right? It's not the end of the world. if they didn't, but it's a nice feature to have, right? Some 4K slow motion footage at 120 frames per second. That's pretty cool. So we have these frames per second and we have our shutter speed. And again, to get the most natural looking footage, the rule of thumb that you want to use is that whatever frame rate you choose, you want your shutter speed to be double your frame rate. So if you choose a frame rate of 24 frames per second, you would want a shutter speed of 1/48. Well, your camera may not have a 1/48 shutter speed, but the next closest is probably 1/50. So you would just choose the next closest shutter speed if, when you double it, that number doesn't exist. If you're shooting in 60 frames per second, then your shutter speed, of course, would be 1/120 or 1/125, whatever shutter speed is next or closest to the 1/120. So that's how you do it to get a good frame rate and a shutter speed that's going to give you the most natural looking footage at that frame rate. So hopefully that makes some sense to you guys. Why would we want to choose a certain frame rate? Well, frame rate's real simple. If you're sitting down to watch a Hollywood movie, you're looking at a frame rate that is typically filmed in 24 frames per second. And the reason for this is that 24 frames per second pretty much mimics how the human eye experiences the world, right? If I am talking to you in person and I'm moving my hands around, there's going to be some blur to my fingers. You're not going to see all the details of my fingers. They're not going to look sharp. They're going to look blurry. That's just how our eye processes the movement. And so 24 frames per second really looks a lot like real life. And so it feels natural to us to view a movie in those frames per second. Now, of course, you can film in higher frame rates, right? Maybe you want to film something in 60 frames per second. Well, when you do that, the difference would be if I was to, move my hand in front of the camera again at 60 frames per second, there would be a lot less blur on my fingers. They would be much sharper and you would pick up more detail in my fingers. The problem with that is that creates an unnatural viewing perspective to us as humans, right? That's not how we see things naturally. So it's unnatural. And because it's unnatural, it tends to create kind of an uneasy feeling. So what'll happen, what movies will do, Hollywood movies will do to kind of create certain vibes, certain looks in a movie, right, is if they're filming at 24 frames per second, they're going to kind of change that shutter speed setting to give you a different effect. You ever seen a movie where someone is dreaming about something, right? They're imagining themselves, maybe, I don't know, something happened to them. They're out in a busy crowded street and they're walking around and it's creating a very dreamlike effect. And there's a lot of blur to the motion. So what they're doing, right, is they're keeping it in 20 frames per second, but they're taking that shutter speed and they're slowing it down. So that'll kind of give you that dreamy effect because it's going to create more blur. Or you can take movies like Saving Private Ryan. Remember when they come to the beach and they're coming out of the boats and they're running around the beach and guns are firing and bombs are going off and they're in the middle of a war, right? They sped that shutter speed up. So at 24 frames per second, they speed that shutter speed up to 1/60 or maybe a little bit higher. And what that creates is a very jittery, sharp effect. And it makes you feel very uneasy. It gives you that uneasy feeling and it makes it feel very dramatic. So this is how Hollywood goes about producing these different effects using frame rates and shutter speeds together. And that is why shutter speed is so important in video. While we are probably not going to be creating these dramatic effects, what we need to know for our video is that whatever frame rate we choose, we need to double the shutter speed and go to the closest shutter speed to the doubling effect as possible. We also want to know what's going to happen when we change our frame rate. So if we go from 24 to 60, our video is going to become sharper. So the next thing that I really want to talk about when we're talking about setting up our video formats are picture profiles. Now this may be underneath a slightly different name. If you're using depending on your camera's manufacturer, again, I shoot Sony, so it's referred to as picture profiles. It should be something very similar to that if you're using Canon, Nikon, or any other manufacturer. But essentially, think of it like this. Picture profiles are kind of like when you set your format in your camera for photography, right? Do you want to photograph your pictures in a RAW format, or do you want to do it in a JPEG? When we photograph in RAW, we get more dynamic range, right? Meaning we get more color tones between the brightest part of the image and the darkest part of the image. And the image tends to be a little bit flatter when we photograph in RAW because it knows that we're going to be taking it into the editing process. And it's at that point that we will mess with the colors and mess with all the different things to really hone in and tweak the picture to get it to look exactly the way we want. When we photograph in JPEG, the camera does processing to the photo. It adds saturation, it adds sharpness, and it really limits the amount of dynamic range we have. So when we overexpose something or underexpose something, it's really hard to recover those details because we don't have the dynamic range available in the JPEG images. So picture profiles in video are very similar to this kind of thought process. You're going to have different profiles. I think in my Sony camera, I have like 12 different profiles. And essentially all that's happening is some of the profiles that you choose will apply some processing to your video. So if you did want to take video and you wanted something that was essentially ready to upload without any editing, there will likely be a picture profile inside of your camera that will allow you to do that. Then they will have picture profiles that will add some processing, but it's going to require some minimal editing to get the final video to where you want it. And then there's going to be other video or profile pictures that really give you a very flat looking image. It doesn't have much color or anything to it because they are, they're expecting that when you take that video into post-production, you're going to do that. You're going to add the color and all of the detail into that video to get it exactly the way you want it. And of course, that's what more professional videographers do. That's actually how I shoot my video. And I'll show you that when we do the editing portion of these two videos. I'll show you how I simply put in a very flat profile and how I color grade it and all those great things. It'll be very, very simple. But those are the picture profiles. So what you would want to do, of course, is you'd want to research through your camera's manual or even YouTube, look up your specific camera and ask, what is the best profile for video? And I'm sure you will find plenty of videos with people explaining what each picture profile is designed to do. And then you can go out and practice taking some video in these profiles to figure out which one is best for your use. Let's talk next about white balance. Now, we were just talking about shooting in the RAW format when you're doing photography, right? Now, when you're shooting in the RAW format with photography, typically it's just best to put your white balance into an auto white balance because when we get into the editing software, we can make it whatever white balance we want. That's one of the big advantages of RAW when it comes to white balance. We can choose whatever white balance we want. We can tweak it to our specific liking, and we can really fine tune white balance to a specific color, temperature, and a specific look and feel. Video is a little bit different though. And we want to be very careful what we do with white balance. And the last thing that I would recommend is using an auto white balance. Think about this for a second. Let's just say you're out in the middle of a field, and let's just say to the far left, you have a tree with a bird sitting on the branch. And suddenly that bird leaves the branch and flies across right in front of you from left to right. And you're got your camera set up with an auto white balance, and you're taking video as the bird moves across the whole field. Well, as you go across the field, maybe the bird starts off in shade, and then maybe it comes into direct sunlight, and then maybe it goes back into shade, but the shade on the right side is very different than the left. Well, what's going to happen if you're in auto white balance? What's going to happen is you're going to have lighting fluctuations going on in your video because as you go to the different scenes, the white balance is going to be changing based on the lighting conditions it's seeing as you're taking that video. That is going to look awful in your footage, and it's something you want to avoid. So quite simply, what I recommend is just like in photo mode, in video mode, you can also select a predetermined white balance, right? Fluorescent, tungsten, daylight, shade, cloudy, all of those options will still exist. What I recommend is just putting it in daylight. where you have a very neutral value on the Kelvin scale. It's right around that 55, 5600 on the Kelvin scale. And again, it's kind of a middle of the road, just a decent setting. And I find it very easy to work with in editing. So that would be my recommendation to you. Set it to daylight in your video. And then if you're shooting in photography, when you switch back, you can just keep it in auto white balance. So that covers white balance, real simple. Next thing that we would be talking about in video is autofocus. Again, not an overly difficult thing. Most of the time when we're in photo mode for wildlife, we're using some kind of autofocusing continuous mode because our animals, our bird, our subject, whatever we're photographing is usually moving at least to some extent, if not to a large extent. Maybe they're flying very rapidly or running very quickly. And so we need a continuous focusing mode to track the subject as it's moving. Well, the same holds true for video, right? So we want to be in a mode that will allow us to track a moving subject in video. So not big, not much of a difference there. Let's talk about a great tool that you can use in video called Zebras. Zebras is just a tool that forms some striping. You'll be, as you look through the viewfinder on the back of your camera's screen, as you're doing some video, if you are overexposed in any part of the frame, you're going to get these zebra striping marks on the back of your camera, just alerting you that, hey, this part of your image is overexposed and you're going to lose detail here if you don't fix it. So of course, we can't change shutter speed, right? Our shutter speed is based on our frame rate. So don't form that habit of, oh, I'll just change my shutter speed. If you change your shutter speed, you're going to screw up your video completely, depending on how much of a change you make and to which side you make it. Stay away from shutter. Remember, we're going to control it with our ISO and we're going to control it with our aperture. Now, the one thing I will alert you to that's just kind of good to know, if you choose a certain picture profile, depending on the profile you choose, like the one I use, as I mentioned to you, is a very flat picture profile. It's called an S-Log. When I have that picture profile in place, if I want to change my ISO, I can't go any lower than 800. Okay, that's just what comes with certain picture profiles. How I know that is there are two lines over the ISO value alerting me, hey, you can't use this value. So I have to use 800 or higher. I can't use 400. I can't use 200. So I can only limit my exposure with ISO only so much because of the profile that I shoot in. The other way I can do it, of course, is to change my aperture. So instead of using f6.3, I may have to use f18 or f16 if I have a real bright sunny day. Now, the other thing that many professional videographers will do, and something that you may want to invest in, is what is called a neutral density filter for your camera lens. And it's just something that screws on to the front of it, and it acts like a pair of sunglasses for your lens. But essentially what it will do is it will limit the brightness that your camera is seeing outside by darkening down the front of the lens for you. So, you can buy them in different levels of darkness, and you'll see it referred to as, hey, this is a 3-stop filter, which means it's going to bring down the brightness 3 stops. You might have a 5-stop or an 8-stop, and you can buy them like that. Or you can also buy a neutral density variable filter. And so this will have maybe 2 to 8 stops worth of light, and you have to twist it to make it darker or lighter depending on your specific needs. Now, you do want to be a little cautious when purchasing these neutral density filters, and you want to be careful with going too cheap, because many of these can cause issues with your video or even photos, because you can use them for photos too. But they can create like vignetting around the corners that is really ugly and awful, or they can create certain color casts to your images. So they can get a little expensive depending on the size of your lens, right? The diameter of your lens. If you have to buy bigger ones, they'll be more expensive, of course. But just do a little research. I don't think you have to go out and spend hundreds of dollars. I have bought filters before that are in the $40 to $60 range, and I've been happy with their performance. But again, do a little bit of research just to make sure what you're getting is pretty decent. But that is another way to help control your exposure other than ISO and aperture. But I do want to stress, don't touch that shutter speed if you're getting those zebras on the back of your camera. But the zebras is just a setting that you can turn on or off, and it will alert you to the overexposed areas of your video. And the last thing that I really want to touch on when it comes to camera settings is, one of the things that can be really fun and really cool when you're out doing videography of wildlife is to also record the noises of the subject that you're doing video of. Or perhaps you just want to capture the ambient noises of the nature around you while you're out there doing it. The one thing I would caution you to do is do not use the internal microphone on your camera. The internal microphone is just super crappy. In fact, I'm going to insert a little video here of me talking on my camera, just using the internal microphone compared to the microphone that I'm using here with this system. I just want you to kind of get an idea for the difference. If I was to make a video for you guys, what it would sound like if I used the camera's internal microphone compared to using a quality microphone. So I will insert that right here. This is the sound of my voice being recorded by my camera's internal microphone. This is the sound of my voice being recorded by my camera's internal microphone. This is the sound of my voice being recorded by the Rode video mic attached to my camera's hot shoe. This is the sound of my voice being recorded by the Rode video mic attached to my camera's hot shoe. Okay, so now that we kind of see the difference between the microphones, when you're out there, again, don't use your camera's internal mic to record. What I would recommend that you get is a shotgun mic. And so I'm just going to take this off here for a second. You get what is referred to as a shotgun mic, and it looks something like this. Okay, and all it does is it sits right on top of your camera's hot shoe. It comes with a wire that plugs into the camera, and then it will just simply plug into the mic jack on your camera. This will increase the sound performance 1,000 times. Now, of course, like anything in photography equipment, the more you spend, generally speaking, the better the performance. This one right here is the Rode Video Mic Go 2. I'll include a link in the show notes. This ran me about $90, but I did purchase this extra piece of equipment. This is referred to as a dead cat. If you're going to be filming outside, this is an essential piece of equipment. Have you ever heard someone talking on a microphone outside without one of these when the wind is blowing? That's all you can hear in the microphone is that wind blowing, and it's super annoying, and it really just kills your footage. So you want one of these dead cats to put on your microphone because it really will reduce the effects of the wind hitting the microphone. So dead cats are great. But again, that whole Rode thing with the dead cat came to about $130. Got it right off Amazon. Works fantastic. I love it. Matter of fact, I used this in a recent video that I posted for you guys where I was outside showing you the video heads, the ball head, the video head, and the gimbal on location, showing you that. And I use this microphone. Now that camera was set up from me maybe 8 feet away. And yes, in editing, I added a little voice enhancement, right? Because that's what you do with any microphone, even this $400 microphone sitting in front of me. There's still a little voice enhancement that goes on to make a microphone sound better, but there's just no making the internal mic in a camera sound any better. It just always sounds like shit. So just avoid that. You can get these shotgun mics. You can get them on Amazon for as little as maybe like $35 to $50. Some brands like Comica, they make some pretty decent microphones like this that are relatively decent quality and really affordable. So that is something that I would look into if you're interested in capturing the sounds of nature. Guys, that is where we're going to end this video. I know this is a little bit longer today, but there's a lot of great information in here for video and getting started with video. Are you doing video right now? Let me know in your comments if you have something that you can share with us as far as, something you've done from a video standpoint for wildlife photography. Let us know so we can see it. What do you think about this video? Are you going to jump out? You're going to try to do some video on your camera now? Where do you stand with this? Would love to know. Hey, if you found this video helpful, which I hope you did, I hope you consider subscribing to this channel. And thank you for spending so much time with me. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video where we're going to talk about editing our video. But until then, hey, best of luck with your wildlife and take care.